This is an RNZ podcast.
It is midweek Media Watch o'clock. Colin Peacock joins me from the studio in Wellington. Colin, hello.
Hi, how are you doing?
I'm pretty good. Do you like a queue? You like a queue, Col?
Yeah, I was thinking about that because I did a few years in the UK and wasn't good at that scrum thing because I'm short and a chicken. But I do recall every now and then there would be people who were clearly like, about a head and shoulder above you who had a clear advantage, who felt embarrassed about that and would kind of almost step back or create a space for you to sort of wriggle your shoulders into, and that would feel good. And every now and then you would be at the front of the bar, the barman would come and, do that silent, like raising his eyebrows things, which is basically a way of saying, what do you want?
What do you want? Yeah.
And knowing that the person next to you had actually been there longer, you could magnanimously just point your hand at them to say, you should serve this person out. It felt like giving to charity, without spending anything.
My first experience of France, Colin, was getting on an escalator and deciding that I didn't want to walk up the escalator because I was carrying lots of bags, and so deciding that I would ride the escalator up. But I was on the right-hand side of the escalator. There's a big no-no in France. If you want to stand where you are, you go on the left side of the escalator, and if you want to walk up it, you go up the right. And so I was just about barreled over by some Frenchman who was in a rush to get somewhere. It's interesting how these things are different from place to place, isn't it?
Purely coincidentally, a senior member of RNZ's news staff sort of apologised to me today for walking towards me in a hallway on the right-hand side, saying, I should have been on the left. I go, well, is that a thing?
It's the road code, isn't it?
But that's in a motor vehicle with a white line in the middle.
It's a metaphor.
Think it matters.
It's a metaphor, Colin.
Yes,
all right, let's talk media stuff. We're going to start with the Epstein Files, which we talked about on this program earlier this week, actually. And more headlines, more Epstein Files. How do you read this? Is this story kind of building up ahead of steam? Is it dragging on? Is it a cynical political distraction?
Yeah, I know you talked about that on Monday, didn't you, with your expert? But to me, I've been not ignoring it exactly, but feeling like it has been dragging on, and perhaps it wasn't going to be all that significant, because if it really could bring down powerful people, including, Trump, and be politically significant, it would have happened by now. The fact that it was such a MAGA preoccupation and there's so much, nonsense and noise associated with that means I have to admit I didn't really follow it. And now that this latest tranche of millions of documents has come out and linkages are emerging between, governments and companies and all sorts of people, and so, Jon Stewart in the States doing a very impassioned thing about, of all of the stuff that's come out, and yet we still only have Maxwell and Epstein who have been actually accountable in one way or another, and that can't go on. So it feels like, it really is piling up. Also the delaying tactics, the fact the US government broke the law and not releasing stuff earlier. It also felt like, because there was the involvement of, the former Prince Andrew, that, because it involved the palace and stuff, and from a New Zealand point of view, royal family, head of state, all of that gave it an angle that actually it wasn't all that significant. But now we see these linkages and these compromised people. You do have to wonder if it becomes a kind of global security thing. So a very different story for media, but also just from the media point of view, the fact that people made absolute stone cold denials, and I suppose the standout one would be that famous Emily Maitlis BBC Newsnight interview with
I Don't Sweat
when he was and all of that, and then subsequently Sarah Ferguson, his I think ex-wife, saying how appalled she was by the lies that had come out because he'd severed that friendship with Epstein, and that she had been in contact with the guy. I mean, from the media point of view, there are people who have gone on the record, said these things, and if that means putting the record straight, that's a sort of service for the public as well in media terms. But
I mean, I find it quite interesting from a media point of view as well, in that this story, it's so outrageous on so many levels, and it has so many ingredients of, it has so many ingredients of stories that people say that they don't like, but nonetheless click on and consume. And I asked this of Peter on when we did it Monday, I think it was, what the responsible thing to do from the media's point of view when reporting on this story is, because people click on it.
But also to be persistent, because when people compare it to Watergate, and the Herald's front page podcast did that with Dr. Robert Patman from Otago University, Watergate, and you think, oh, really? Come on. But then again, that dragged on for ages. I mean, in your mind, you probably think, hang on, Watergate, didn't that all flare up and then it was all sorted by Robert Redford and Dustin Hoffman in about an hour and a half, and Nixon quit when, he was banged to rights. But it didn't. It dragged on for ages. And some of that, the Frost-Nixon tapes, and there went so much stuff, and then Nixon eventually kind of fronted. I mean, you're not going to have that with Trump, are you? Because it would not be extraordinary for him to talk for 48 hours non-stop, probably with some crazy podcaster like Dan Bongino or something. So I don't suppose we'll ever have that as a kind of reckoning, but at some point, history will reckon with this, and it'll be interesting to see what does happen.
In a development this week, sound the New Zealand relevance klaxon, Colin, because we had some revelations about the former University of Auckland Professor Brian Boyd.
I think you should be the keeper of that klaxon, but yeah. So Steve Braunius, piece in Newsroom, popped up, I think on Monday morning. He just phoned him up and said, I see that you're in these documents. And Brian Boyd the former professor of literature at Auckland University.
He's considered one of the world authorities on Vladimir Nabokov.
On Vladimir Nabokov, who is, of course, a preoccupation for Jeffrey Epstein, which becomes extremely creepy when you think about his, subsequent convictions. But Boyd told Steve Braunius he kind of expected that this might come out at some point. He might have been hoping it wouldn't, and, he'd have to explain the connection and that he'd actually met Epstein, but he said he was kind of okay with it because, the thing they proposed, which was Epstein funding him to write a book about Nabokov, and I think specifically Lolita, the novel, but it never happened. He kind of decided that Epstein was icky, and so maybe just in time the whole thing was okay. But he also went on TVNZ's Breakfast Show, and they introduced him as being shocked to have been named, which is a bit weird because he told Steve Braunius he really wasn't, and in the interview itself, he seemed pretty unbothered.
You feel pretty icky is what I read. It feels pretty icky.
It feels pretty icky. I mean, everything about Epstein is icky. I mean, he's a smooth psychopath and narcissist, and So he could be charming, and he loved to collect names, and he was tossing them off all the time in his emails to me.
And ultimately, are you worried about being named in this latest tranche of emails?
No, there's nothing to worry about. No.
So, I mean, he's not on trial here and, not having to answer for things specifically, but I thought TVNZ should have pressed him a little bit harder, seeing as they had him in the studio. He was actually angling for more money from this icky billionaire to write the book. He did correspond with them about note the bevy of beauties who were accompanying him, as he put it. Those are Boyd's own words. He said they looked like graduates, maybe early 20s, may have appeared younger. I don't know. And when Steve Braunius in the Newsroom piece asked him, do you think Epstein's interest in Nabokov and Lolita was, sordid or literary, his answer was, a bit of both. Mm-hmm. So I think it would be worth putting some more questions to him if you had him in the studio rather than, because, clearly what happens, he's had similar sort of relationships with a whole lot of other people. He's got money, he's got resources, he's got something that can interest them, could provide them with opportunities, and maybe that shuts down people's sort of self-inquiry and suspicion and curiosity about the guy that they now say they found icky and reprehensible.
He did front Brian Boyd. He could, and I'm sure many people would have kind of gone to ground and waited and hoped for this to blow over.
Yeah, plenty have. So, good on him for doing that. And I was a bit surprised there are other sort of New Zealand connections that you could have deployed the klaxon. A couple called the Bryces who managed his properties and possibly even for a time, the St. James, is it St. James Island? Or Little St. James, the island so-called Epstein Island. I mean, there might be good legal and editorial reasons why those and other minor New Zealand connections that have emerged and been spotted in these documents haven't been chased up or reported. But again, just for the reason of clarity, because I'm sure there must be a lot in all those 3 million plus files that are misleading or wrong when, because a lot of it is just claims. But that's where, the journalism can help.
Let's turn to a different matter. On MediaWatch last weekend, Cole, you had a look at the coverage and the commentary of the disaster at Mount Maunganui. Some more of that caught your eye.
Yeah, and again, I don't want to just go over things again, but the Prime Minister sparked some of this because he referred to misinformation and even racist sentiments online, urging people to keep opinions to themselves. And he wasn't explicit, but that was assumed to be, people that jumped on conclusions and went online on social media to say, the removal of non-native trees at the prompting of iwi guardians and the local council there might have either caused or been significant in that slip. Some people went out and out. There was a repeated reference to this phrase, colonial trees. That definitely took off. And I looked at the document. I can't see anything that's publicly available that ever uses anything like that phrase. There's a management plan that talks about trees planted on archaeological features that could be removed to prevent further loss of archaeological information. But that seemed a really loaded phrase, this colonial trees. For example, one that I missed last week, but Duncan Garner, his MediaWorks podcast editor-in-chief, he used that colonial trees phrase several times.
And the authorities, the council, who own the campsite and the hot pools, and the iwi, who own the mountain, say wait for the official inquiry. They deflect and they dive and they hope that time brings cover from responsibility. But facts sit in the public arena undisputed, which paint a pretty clear picture already of some dreadful decision-making or no decision-making, of so-called colonial trees being removed from the mountain at the iwi's insistence in 2017, and of the land being destabilised as a result by human decisions that all lead to where we are today.
Oh, so-called colonial trees, though.
Yeah, but I think what he's doing there is echoing the claims of people that wanted to elevate that, into the discussion and, might have said, just asking questions or whatever. He did say 6 people died. Duncan Garner said on his podcast, 6 people died because human decisions altered the land in 2017. And I don't think you could support that at this point. He's sort of done this before when he was talking about, iwi having rights of veto over IKEA and that they'd held up IKEA and something that was That was really not the case, and IKEA had voluntarily embarked on that process of consulting with iwi. So anyway, that is another thing. But I
guess the core of that matter is, both things can be true here. Tree removal, whatever the motive, could have contributed to instability, and that will have to be investigated. Yeah,
that's right. And some of the sort of experts in land and erosion and geology that were quoted in kind of fact-checking pieces by the likes of stuff the Herald and RNZ did say that. But retired judge David Harvey, who's a columnist and for the Herald and the Listener, has his own Substack, writes quite long but quite precise, maybe sort of slightly legalistic type commentaries about things. He looked at this and published a piece called Erosion, Cause or Contribution, and he was really critical of the way the media had framed those kind of fact-checking or rebuttal pieces, whatever you want to call them, of these claims that tree removal might have caused it. So he says he chides the Prime Minister for using this term misinformation. And he says, for example, he picks the Herald, who had a piece called Mount Maunganui, Misinformation, Did Cutting Down Trees Really Cause the Landslide? He says a disdainful tone is adopted. He says the Herald, this is a quote from the Herald piece, critics mostly without geological science backgrounds have claimed the actions of the Tauranga Council and local iwi are now partly responsible for the deadly slip. But it really isn't disdainful to point out that some of the people saying this and promoting this colonial trees idea were not, highly qualified experts in geological science. He then criticised the Prime Minister. He said the PM should not have adopted, this is Judge Harvey's words, should not have adopted the Ardern default position of describing discussion as misinformation. It displayed a woeful ignorance of the fact that erosion and landslips have a number of factors present, but that wasn't actually, to my knowledge, something the Prime Minister ever actually said. The removal of trees, says Judge Harvey, may be one of the contributing factors, but more importantly, he says the Prime Minister's attitude demonstrated a level of arrogance directed towards those exercising their right to freedom of expression, and that must be a concern. But I think he's wrong about that. He was the Prime Minister. Of course, he's, it's top-down stuff. He's a country's most powerful person, but I don't think he was stopping people exercising their right to freedom of expression, just pointing out that the story was kind of incomplete.
A lot of people now making the point, Cole, that insurance companies are pointing the way, refusing to insure homes in prone places.
Yeah, and that is becoming a really interesting story, even just in the last 24 hours. Kate Newton at RNZ reporting on other places, Blenheim, Renwick, even Rolleston, places like that are fast growing, being kind of redlined by insurance companies. And I noted that Business Desk's Dilipa Fonseca on Monday noted that the government was looking at potential measures to address insurance affordability. It was Business Desk asking about whether there was a market study on this, and lo and behold, they've kind of announced more or less that. So that is interesting. And if people are pointing the finger at our poor and not very joined up record of responding to crises and getting ahead of them in terms of safety and landslides and infrastructure. Daniel McLaughlin in the latest Listener, so this was written before that government response to the insurance thing, says this isn't hypothetical, the insurance retreat is underway. And he said when outfits like that, sectors that can see the consequences just fine and have decided that it's a problem, they're acting, then, it really is time to change the way we do things.
Christopher Luxon got a lot of praise for his visits to the flood and storm affected areas and how he conducted himself. But there was one slightly unfortunate video that went viral and became news, would you say?
It did. It was definitely reported, and he was asked about it. This is a TikTok video. He was patting on a firefighter on the shoulder, I think in Te Araroa. And then when he strides away towards, I think, the helicopter that's going to cart him away, the firefighter in question turned to the camera that was recording it and made, there's various sort of descriptions of this, like mocking masturbatory gestures. I think they I'm going to call it the wanker sign. I think we know what it is, the sort of shaking hand gesture. Sorry if that's offending people.
Well, the BSA's language report came out recently, didn't it, Cole? So you can look that up.
It did. I noticed you didn't canvass that directly with Stacey Wood on last night, but maybe you should have. But look, obviously it's no big deal. It's just an incident. It's just a thing. Someone reacted. The Prime Minister was there. But I think people seized on it because in describing it as a kind of humiliation, not in the news media, but on social media, that, he's got a reputation for speaking, in a not particularly authentic way. Some people think he's a phony. I think too much was made of it. And by and large, if you read accounts of him attending vigils, community events, meeting families, that they say he conducted himself, was, I think, kind of a bit unfair that people will kind of rejoice in the fact that, someone takes the opportunity to kind of belittle him in that way.
Has he been asked about that video, Christopher Luxon?
Yeah, he was on the Ryan Bridge Today show on that Herald Now platform, and he was pretty cool about it, I thought. He said, look, I haven't seen the video. He said he wasn't aware of it, but which I find kind of surprising.
I haven't seen the video. It's surprising.
Yeah,
given the army of media teams.
Well, yeah, because nowadays you have people who's do what they know. Even the Prime Minister's own account has an awful lot of followers, so I think they would certainly be aware if there was something that was embarrassing, or that just for his own self-interest he was likely to be asked about in a media interview, which indeed happened on Monday with Ryan Bridge. But Luxon just said, look, it's up to individuals how they respond. I was there in their territory, they were doing their thing, and I think that was a good way to handle it. Yeah.
And then shortly afterwards on that Ryan Bridge interview, Christopher Luxon tried his hand at a new job.
Yeah, that's right. This was in the same interview. Yeah, Ryan Bridge. It was a little bit awkward. So this was, they had their next guest was the young runner, Sam Ruth, who'd just broken that record for the mile in somewhere in the US, Boston, I think. But it was a bit awkward. So Ryan Bridge kind of handed it to let the Prime Minister interview him. And this is kind of how it wound up.
Yeah. And the competition in America is actually bringing the best out of you? Quite a full-on environment, eh? Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Sam, the PM has...
Yeah.
The PM has to run to a plane, so we'll let him go, but we'll keep chatting this morning. Prime Minister, thank you very much for being with me.
Thanks, mate. See you, buddy. Take care.
That was Prime Minister Christopher Luxon, and Sam Ruth is with us.
Yeah, you got to wait for the interviewee to answer the question. It can feel uncomfortable, right? When you ask a question, there's a bit of silence.
Well, that's the problem. If you try and improv these things with someone who's not all that comfortable with it, or a complete media professional. So, I mean, but also this is going to sound a bit cranky, but in principle, I don't think you should kind of hand the editorial reins over to a politician who's supposed to be there to be answering questions. You're kind of giving away your airtime, and that's time that could have been spent getting a headline making response from him on something much more substantive. But mainly it's just bad TV, right? When you've got someone who's not prepped for it, not comfortable, everyone's over talking each other. Both Luxon and Sam Ruth didn't really know what was happening, and it just sort of sounds a bit awkward there. So I mean, it's no biggie, but not a fan of that.
Let's talk a bit about media ownership. MediaWorks, which owns a lot of commercial radio, so about half the country's commercial radio stations, has a new owner, Colin.
Yes, a new ultimate owner. So it's a bit complicated, but also really ironic, because the company is Nine Entertainment in Australia, which used to own Fairfax Media, which owned Stuff here, right? So now what it's done is it sold out its radio holdings in Australia, so it's getting out of Australian radio, and that freed up quite a substantial sum, 850 million Australian dollars, to buy a company called QMS, which is an outdoor advertising company that's also here in New Zealand, has some big contracts like Auckland Transport, bus stops and so on. And it turns out QMS was a 40% owner of the MediaWorks company here, which these days, it used to be TV3, but these days is just those radio stations. But, half of the country's commercial stations and some of the most popular ones, well-performing ones. And last year, QMS became the sole owner because a private equity company, Quadrant, kind of sold out. So the company here is a different entity to the QMS in Australia, and structured, and the board is staffed a bit differently. But really ironic that Nine Entertainment wants to get out of radio in Australia and get into this more lucrative thing of billboards and advertising and so on, and as a result of that ends up being the ultimate owner of New Zealand radio companies. And of course the self-same company, Nine, having owned Fairfax, which owned Stuff here, is the same company that 5.5 years ago offloaded the entire Stuff company to its current owner, Sinead Boucher, in that management buyout for the sum of $1 because they just didn't want it. So it seems that whatever Nine do in trying to shuck off media interests they don't want in Australia or New Zealand, they end up owning that very medium in the country they don't appear to be interested in.
Just when I thought I was out. All right, finally, Colin, the verdicts on the vaunted government roadcone hotline are in.
And they're not good. Yeah, we already knew there was a WorkSafe review that found excessive use of road cones was, 6% of the 250 sites inspected. So no big deal. So all these complaints they wanted to, harvest the public anger about road cones turned out to be pretty much a waste of time and money. Not a huge amount of money. Labor put it at 150,000. RNZ reported that. But my eye was caught by, it's clearly a political stunt. The media knew it. It was a populist thing. The Herald's editorial on Monday, was the road cone hotline the most comically farcical use of taxpayers' money? ? And why the question mark? Because the last line of their own editorial is, it's hard to think of a more comically farcical use of public money from the government. So they knew the answer. But I would say actually the media kind of played into that, that road cone thing, and Wayne Brown making big noises out of it. And I think they knew it wasn't a serious issue. The road cone hotline was never going to be, a serious or effective public service. And I would say the media played into this whole road cone nonsense because engagement, clicks, the algorithm, all of that. And now to say the government were idiots for doing this, I think they'd probably look at some of their own reporting.
What's it called, Colin? The law of headlines? No, it's betterage. Betterage is law of headlines. Any headline that ends in a question mark can easily be answered by the word no.
No, but in this case, it wasn't. And they knew it because the last line of their own editorial said it. So, wrong headline.
Wrong headline, right. Colin Peacock, thank you very much. We'll catch you next week.
Thanks very much. I'll be back.